Hello everybody and welcome back to Vehicles of War Thunder. So before we get started, I do want to go ahead and note that this is not the vehicle I had originally intended to cover for my second video upon my return to this series. However, within like the past week of when I am recording this, Gaijin has started announcing some of the vehicles that are going to be in the third battle pass for War Thunder. One of those two vehicles that, again, as of when I'm recording this, that they've announced is a variant of the vehicle that I had originally intended to cover for my second Vehicles of War Thunder video upon my return for what is like the third or fourth time now. But yeah, so I had to change my plans because one of the whole things about this series is that at the end I sort of talk about how does the vehicle perform, is it a good vehicle, is it bad? Things like that. Are some variants of it good while others are bad? You know, so I needed to wait. So now for me to be able to do that, my video on that vehicle, I have to wait until I have access to that variant that's being added to the Battle Pass so that I can play that variant, figure out if it's any good, potentially play styles for how you should play it, things like that, so that I can include that in the video, especially because I don't want to do it as like some sort of addendum type thing that's added in after the fact. So yeah, I had to, like I said, change my plans. So let's get into the actual vehicle that we are going to be covering in this video, which is the Curtiss P-36 series of aircraft. The only variants of this vehicle, or rather aircraft, that are available in the game as of this recording are in the American tech tree, these models being the A, C, and G models. The A model is available both in the tech tree and as a premium that is included in the US starter bundle. Now let's get on to the actual history. At the beginning of the 1930s, the United States Army Air Corps had realized that biplane development had reached its zenith and that it was time to progress to monoplanes as pursuit aircraft. In 1931, with the introduction of the Boeing B-9 monoplane bomber, the United States Army Air Corps was now faced with the fact that it had a new generation of bombers that were faster than its existing fleet of biplane fighters. And while the monoplane had been introduced during the First World War with the Fokker-Eindecker E-3, at the time the consensus was that monoplane fighters weren't quite strong enough for the demands of combat. However, in the intervening years, engine technology had continued to develop, and with requirements for faster and faster aircraft, the United States Army Air Corps was forced to shift their strategy and seek a more advanced design. This would initially come in the form of the Boeing P-26 pea shooter, which I have already done a video on, and you can find a link to it in the cards up in the top right-hand corner. The P-26 was the first of the concept of an all-metal pursuit monoplane. It was also conservative in its design, having fixed gear and external wing bracings. And while it would go on to prove to be an effective fighter against Japanese aircraft in the Philippines at the beginning of World War II, it was an interim design, and it was not actually intended for combat usage. With the mid-30s approaching, the United States Army Air Corps held a competition to find a replacement for the P-26. The companies that would compete in this competition included Curtiss, Sikorsky, better known as Republic Aviation, and Northrop. The Curtiss Model 75 was designed by a former Northrop Aircraft Company engineer by the name of Don R. Berlin. This prototype was constructed in 1934 and featured an all-metal construction with fabric-covered control surfaces. It was powered by the Wright RX-1670-5 radial engine, which developed 900 horsepower, and had an armament of one 7.62mm machine gun and one 12.7mm machine gun. The prototype first flew on May 6, 1935, reaching a speed of 281 miles per hour at 10,000 feet. So that would be 452 kilometers an hour at 3,000 meters. On May 27, 1935, the prototype was flown to Wright Field, Ohio to compete in the United States Army Air Corps competition. The competition was delayed, however, because the Seversky entry crashed on its way to Wright Field. Curtiss took this time to replace the unreliable Wright RX-1670-5 radial engine with a Wright RX-1820-39 Cyclone engine that produced 950 horsepower, and to rework the fuselage slightly, adding the distinctive scalloped rear windows to improve visibility. This new prototype was designated as the Model 75B, with the previous model being retroactively designated as the Model 75D. The competition finally took place in April 1936. Curtiss's new engine unfortunately failed to deliver its rated power, and the aircraft only reached a top speed of 285 miles per hour, or 459 kilometers an hour. The Seversky entry, called the P-35, also underperformed and was more expensive, and however, it was still declared the winner and awarded a contract for 77 aircraft. However, on June 16, 1936, Curtiss received an order from the United States Army Air Corps for 3 prototypes to be designated as the Y-1P-36. The United States Army Air Corps was worried about rising tensions in Europe and the ability of Seversky to deliver the P-35s in a timely manner, and so they wanted a backup fighter. This new model was dubbed the Model 75E and was powered by a 1,050 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R1830-13 Twin Wasp, and the scalloped rear canopy was further enlarged. This model would go on to win the 1937 United States Army Air Corps competition and get an order for 210 P-36A fighters. The P-36 has an extremely low wing loading of just 23.9 pounds per feet squared, giving the aircraft outstanding turning performance. To quote the Czech ace, whose name I'm about to butcher, I'm sorry, František Perina, when asked in an interview, the question he was asked was something to the effect of, the P-36 is not regarded as one of the great fighters of World War II, but that he seemed to have done well in the aircraft. What did he think of it? To which he responded, only one word: terrific. It was not as fast as the Messerschmitt, but it could outmaneuver any German aircraft. If one got on your tail in one 360-degree turn, you were behind him. The P-36 also had a high power-to-weight ratio of 0.186 horsepower per pound, which gave the aircraft superb climbing performance for the time. However, with only a single-speed supercharger, the P-36 was handicapped at high altitudes. This vehicle was used by a number of other nations besides the United States, including Argentina, Brazil, the British Commonwealth, China, Finland, France, Persia, the Netherlands, Norway, Peru, Portugal, and Thailand. Now, for the differences between the variants of this vehicle that are in the game, starting first with the variants that are in the game at this time. The P-36A kept the original prototype's one 12.7mm machine gun and one 7.62mm machine gun mounted in the nose. The P-36A is powered by a Pratt & Whitney R-1830-13 or -17. Some of my sources claim that it used both. I can only assume the reason for this is that potentially some of the very early production models of the A variant used the -13 engine, while later versions used the -17 engine. The version in War Thunder, however, uses the -17 engine. The P-36C upgraded the engine to the Pratt & Whitney R-1830-17 for all units that were produced, which developed 1,200 horsepower, and upgraded the armament to one 12.7mm machine gun and one 7.62mm machine gun, both located in the nose, as well as an additional two 7.62mm machine guns mounted in the wings, one in each wing. The P-36G swapped out the engine for the Wright the Wright R-1820-G205A Cyclone, and upgraded the armament to two 12.7mm machine guns located in the nose and four 7.62mm machine guns mounted in the wings, two in each wing. Now onto the variants that are not currently available in the game. First thing to mention is that the Model the Model 75H was the internal designation for two slightly different simplified export versions that both had fixed landing gear. The first model was sold to China and the second model was sold to Argentina. I'm not sure what differences there were between these two models and the normal production model beyond the existence of the fixed landing gear. Next, there are four different models that were sent to the French. The first model is the Hawk 75A-1. This was the first batch production model for the French, of which 100 were ordered and built. This model swapped out the 12.7mm and the 7.62mm machine guns for four 7.5mm machine guns, and swapped the engine for the Pratt & Whitney R-1830-SC3G, developing 1,050 horsepower. Most aircraft of this variant were moved to Africa in June 1940, though some variants escaped to Britain, where they became the Mohawk 1, Mohawk being the British designation for this aircraft, Hawk being, for the most part, the French designation, though some other nations also used it. The Hawk 75A-2 was the second production batch for the French, of which 100 were also built and ordered. This variant added an additional two 7.5mm machine guns. The engine was swapped out for the Pratt & Whitney R-1830-S1C3-G, developing again 1,050 horsepower. Those aircraft of this variant that escaped to Britain became the Mohawk 2. The Hawk 75A-3 was the third batch production model for the French, of which 135 were built. This model kept the same guns as the A2 variant, but swapped out the engine for a 1,200 horsepower variant of the Pratt & Whitney R-1830-S1C3-G. Only 60 reached France. Others reached Morocco, and 20 were taken over by the RAF as the Mohawk 3. The Hawk 75A-4 was the fourth and final production batch for the French. The armament was the same as the A2 and A3 variants, however the engine was swapped for the Wright R-1820-G205A Cyclone, developing 1,200 horsepower. Only 6 of this model reached France. 4 were lost at sea, 23 were sent to Martinique where they sat out the war. The remaining 251 units initially ordered were sent from the factory to the RAF, where they were given British equipment and designated as the Mohawk 4. The Hawk 75A-5 was the model that was to be assembled in China by the Central Aircraft Manufacturing Company using kits that were produced by Curtiss. The model aircraft was built by Curtiss, and some kits did manage to reach China. However, soon after, the company moved to Bangalore, India, and renamed itself to Hindustan Aircraft Ltd. At least 6 of these were built in Bangalore, where they were taken over by the RAF and became the Mohawk 4. The Hawk 75A-6 was a model ordered by Norway, of which 24 units were ordered. This model was powered by the 1,200 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R-1830-S1C3-G Twin Wasp. It was armed with 4 7.9mm Browning machine guns. None were delivered before the Germans invaded. Some of those that did arrive after the invasion were captured and then later sold to Finland. The Hawk 75A-7 was a variant ordered by the Dutch. and were powered by a 1200 horsepower Cyclone engine. I'm not sure exactly which model because my sources do not state, but if I had to make a guess, it's probably the Wright R-1820-G205A. These were armed with one 12.7mm machine guns and one 7.7mm machine gun in the nose. In early versions, later models, however, swapped out for four 7.7mm machine guns, two in the nose and one in each wing. My sources also claim that this model had the ability to equip 6 50-pound bombs. None of these units, managed to reach the Netherlands before the German invasion, and were instead sent to the Dutch East Indies, where they saw heavy fighting against the Japanese in early 1942. The Hawk 75A8 was another order by Norway just before the German invasion, with an order of 36 units. These were powered by a 1200 horsepower Wright R-1820-G205A Cyclone, and were armed with two 12.7mm nose guns and two 7.9mm wing guns. None, however, managed to reach Norway. In February 1941, six were given to the Free Norwegian Forces in Canada, with the remaining 30 being taken over by the U.S. Army and given the designation of the P-36G. Finally, the Hawk 75A9 was ordered by Persia and was powered by the 1200 horsepower Wright R-1820-G205A engine. These aircraft managed to reach Persia, however they were still in their crates when the British occupied Persia. They were completed by the British and sent to the RAF in India as the Mohawk 4. I'm not quite sure what the armament was for this variant. My sources do not claim. So that's a thing. There are also some other variants, but I decided to go ahead and focus on some of the bigger ones. But let's go ahead and actually get into how this vehicle performs in-game. So first things first, let's start with some of the things that are common amongst all the variants in the game right now. First, as mentioned previously, this vehicle is fairly good as a turn fighter. Is it the best? No. Is it pretty good to much of what it will face, with the exception of Japan? Oh yeah, very much. Second, again, as mentioned previously, this vehicle is actually really good at climbing. I've managed to regularly climb at about a 15-degree angle of ascent, and still pick up speed while wepping until at around about 1500 meters, after which you start to lose speed faster and faster as your altitude increases if you attempt to maintain that 15-degree angle of ascent. So at that point you need to start nosing down a little bit to something that's a little bit flatter. Obviously not quite. Typically at that point I go down to about a 10-degree and still manage to work out perfectly fine. Now, onto some of the things that are bad about all of the variants of this aircraft. Starting at around about 500 kilometers an hour, the controls start to compress. And it gets worse the higher and higher you are above 500 kilometers an hour. So when you have to dive down on an enemy that is below you, you're going to want to throttle back, possibly all the way to 0, which is typically what I did. I just found that worked best. I, at times, still managed to actually lose speed in a dive when at 0% throttle. But I can only assume that was because of the exact angle of my dive not being quite as extreme as it could have been. Another thing, however, that is bad about these aircraft, and this again affects every variant of it that is currently in the game, is that their ammo belts leave something to be desired. My experience was that stealth belts were the only one that delivered consistently good results, but even then, I would attribute that entirely to the 12.7mm, with the 7.62mm just sort of being there. Obviously, there is a downside to using stealth belts as opposed to anything else. Stealth belts lack tracers, so it requires you to have a better understanding of the trajectory of your guns so that you can minimize wasting what little precious ammo you have, because again, the 12.7 was really the only one that I think actually was doing the work. Particularly on the A variant, the C and G are helped a little bit because of the additional 7.62s, and in the case of the G, an additional 12.7 millimeter. Sort of helps to make up for the somewhat lackluster performance of the 7.62s. But yeah, especially when you go up against any heavier targets. Fighters, 7.62s might work, but it takes more ammo than I would like, to be honest. But let's go ahead and get on to things that are unique to each of the variants. Well, relatively speaking. Starting with the A variant. There's really nothing good that I can say about the A variant that is unique to it. As for the bad, as mentioned, the existence of only one 7.62 and one 12.7 millimeter for the armament configuration, the aircraft kind of struggles to down enemies, particularly anything that's heavy in terms of its armor, which obviously most aircraft don't have particularly heavy armor in this game, but still, anything more than like literally paper mache, which is basically just Japan. This is the only one who uses paper mache. You're gonna struggle with, in my opinion, and experience from playing this. Now, and again, this is not helped by the lackluster belt of either of the guns. Now, let's go ahead and move on to the C variant. The C variant trades in a little bit of its speed for an additional 7.62 millimeter, or two additional 7.62 millimeter guns. In War Thunder, if I recall correctly, I believe this is a change from a top speed of 504 kilometers an hour to 501 kilometers an hour. Not really all that significant, all things considered. And the additional 7.62s I do think help. They're still not the greatest, but the additional little bit of firepower that they provide does help. But again, the belts are still somewhat lackluster. Finally, let's move on to the G variant. The G variant does not trade in any speed for the total armament of two 12.7 millimeter machine guns in the nose and four 7.62 millimeter machine guns in the wings. Much like the C variant, the additional 7.62 millimeter guns help, but I still find the 7.62s to not be all that great. So yeah, again, it's nice that you got a little bit extra lead that you can throw down range, but I still don't think it's actually helping significantly. I think the biggest thing that actually helps the G variant over any of the others is the fact that it has two 12.7s instead of just the one. But I do want to go ahead and note that I seem to have more consistently good matches in the C variant as opposed to either of the other two. In the case of the G, my guess would only be that because it has a higher battle rating of 2.3 as opposed to the 1.7 of the C variant, the A variant has 1.3 if memory serves me correctly. Yeah, and obviously these are realistic battles for the battle ratings. I think the G, what it goes up against at that 2.3 battle rating, because it's in theory able to go up against anything that's upwards of a 3.3 battle rating, it is actually slightly hampered. It really is. You can still have really good matches in the G. It's just that I think it requires a little bit extra work and a little bit more luck, both for your team and enemy composition, as well as obviously having good teammates. I do also want to note, since it's been quite a while since the last time I played low-tier American aircraft, one thing I noticed is that it seems like a lot of people don't know how to fight the Japanese at low tier. Particularly, well, American teams rather don't know how to fight the Japanese, particularly at low tier. And that's one of the reasons why all of the matches you've seen in the background of this video have been against some combination of the Germans, Soviets, Chinese, and Italians. I don't think I ever fought any Swedish, somewhat surprisingly. But yeah, so that's just one thing I noticed, is that American teams don't know how to fight Japanese teams. Again, the P-36 is a pretty good turn fighter. It's not the best. It will not outturn Japanese aircraft in general. But if you play your cards right, it is actually possible to still manage to get some nice shots in on a Japanese aircraft during a turn fight. Sadly, I don't have any particularly good footage of that because I never had any particularly good matches in those. So, yeah. But I did have time. Again, the Japanese use paper mache as armor, so they're very easy to set on fire. And at low tier, because most battles tend to take place at a fairly low altitude, because again, people just haven't learned to climb, and also the fact that these aircraft don't do particularly good in a sustained dive, results in a lot of fights taking place at fairly low altitudes. And when you're at low altitude, especially, if you get set on fire, you're done. You're just done. You're not getting out of that. But yeah, so that's actually going to be it for this video. Like I said, I do think that these are pretty good aircraft. They really are. They're not the greatest. They're definitely not. Even at this battle rating, I would not say that they are the greatest, but they are pretty good. So yeah, that'll be it for this part. Reminder that I do have a Patreon and a Discord. I highly recommend that you join the Discord so you can stay up to date on channel happenings. As for the Patreon, if you find yourself enjoying this video and or any of the other videos on the channel and you want to help support the channel so I can continue to bring you this content that you are hopefully enjoying, that is the easiest and best way to help support the channel. For as little as $1 a month, you get early access to all of my videos. That early access tends to come in the form of 1 week, give or take a day or two, early access. For some series that is useful because it allows you to be able to give me tips and tricks if you feel so inclined, and actually have me be able to read them in a timely manner to the point where they actually matter. Otherwise, I probably won't see it if you wait until the video is actually made public. But yeah, so I will, like I said, see you all next time. Hopefully next month. I would love to get these videos out on a monthly basis, but I can't guarantee that that'll be the case. And obviously if I ever stop enjoying War Thunder, I will just disappear. But yeah, so I will see you all in the next video it is you watch on the channel, whether that be another Vehicles of War Thunder in the future, or one of the previous ones I've uploaded, or if it's some other series that I've uploaded on the channel. But until then, a goodbye and farewell.